Hi, and welcome back to That's Trash. Today we'll be asking the question, where are you from?
No, really, where are you from?
I hate that question. It's the assumption that if you don't look like the majority, you must not be from, or in this case, a settler on the land you occupy.
Today, we are welcoming back our friend Nata to discuss this long-hated question of ours. So welcome, Nata. We are so happy to have you here. We are going to be talking about being a person of color in Canada. And Nata, you have an interesting history. Would you mind telling us a little bit about where you're from and how you immigrated to Canada?
I immigrated when I was 8. I'm from Fiji. And for folks that don't know a little bit about Fiji, I'm Indigenous Fijian. So there's a lot of different cultures in Fiji. Indo-Fijians make up 52% of the population. I have strong roots in Fiji. We have these things called yadas in my culture, and yadas are sort of like namesakes. But your grandparents pick your name, and my Fijian name is Asinada Rongida Nungawai, and Nata is the name that was given to me by my grandmother. So Asinada Rongida, I'm named after so many women that my grandparents thought I would be like. And they don't have to be blood relatives. It's just your yadas are, you can look back and see where all your yadas are from in the Fijian content. Anyways, so I immigrated when I was 8. Why I love Tina Turner so much is because What's Love Got to Do With You was playing in the Vancouver airport when I landed. So, and then we went straight to Edmonton. So I grew up in lots of rural parts of Edmonton, Alberta, and that was a tough upbringing. It was predominantly white, predominantly rural, super racist, and I came to Vancouver, and it wasn't as good, but at least folks were just a little bit more progressive. Mm-hmm. If you're not getting it, you're at least trying to get it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think what happens, and I kind of realized this after my mom passed away a couple of years ago, and why we immigrated is because she remarried a Canadian guy who I've known since since I was 2 years old. And one of the things that I realized after my mom passed away is like how strong she was. And I didn't realize it, I realized it a little bit, at the time, but I realized the amount of racism that she had to endure coming to a new country, not knowing the language, not having her village, the village in Fiji, there are hundreds and hundreds of relatives, and I am that's my kin, and she didn't have anyone, and I couldn't imagine what she had to go through. Also, marrying into a family that some folks were racist, and this was her new family. And so that really gave me a lot of pause around understanding why some of the things that I had to go through, I think she had to go through and didn't know how to help me or how to help us navigate the racism and the bullying that we endured. And that was a huge realization, the realization of her strength to keep us safe in the only way she could, with knowing that her own safety was always in jeopardy. And being remarried to a white husband who was a bit tone deaf around the racism and that she experienced. And and so, and I think that's what kind of, tapping into that strength, tapping into that made me think about relationships in a deeper meaning, not just the face value relationship, not that's the surface parts, not the parts that the painful parts that we see, but it's those painful parts we don't see, the ones that are carrying that pain. I think that's why, to me right now, the joy is so important. It's not because I'm negating that trauma or what have you. It's oh my gosh, where do we get the break? Where can we find the peace to just keep holding that that space for folks.
Well, and I would say that even celebrating our joy is an act of resistance. You know, I think with all the trauma that people of color experience on a regular basis, it's really important that we really savor and lean into those joyous moments, because like that can't be taken away from us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's funny when folks try to take away that joy, you know, even just like joking about Black culture, you know, or just like, you know, trying to find, you know, the happiness. And I think when like we're holding space for folks, we really need to understand that holding space means like you don't have to say anything. You just have to allow folks to be however they need to be. Sometimes me and my partner will, you know, if we're taking a road trip, because race and equity and gender and queerness always plays a role in our conversations. I sometimes have to, and she loves these podcasts, like she loves podcasts, you know, and I love podcasts too, but sometimes I can't, you know, she'll want to put on a podcast about, you know, cops killing folks, Black folks, or like, you know, get different sides of stories. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, but I can't hear that right now. Like I can't do it right now. And it's not because you know, I'm not interested. It's like, because it's too hard constantly.
And sometimes it's just too much. It's just too much. And I was having a really good conversation the other day with some other filmmakers, and we were talking about solidarity, and sometimes you need to take care of yourself, because you can be for all of these lives and trying to do the work all the time, but you're also a traumatized person, and sometimes you need to give yourself a break and find that joy, like Mahkeebah was saying, and both of you were saying.
Nata, you were talking about how you're born in Fiji and immigrated to Canada when you were 8. I just wanted to know, or I guess we wanted to know a little bit more about your experience in Fiji, like growing up surrounded by so many people. Like you said, you had like a tribe-like experience. What was that like for you in contrast to Canada?
Well, I mean, talk about a construct, you know, when you're around other Black people, you're like, you just exist.
Yeah.
You know? And so when I'm in the village, like this happened to me. So when I'm in the village, when I'm in Fiji, when I was growing up, like there was family all around me. Like there was just, for me, like I have clear memories of just sitting on the beach, sucking on a mango, you know, watching, you know, and the world would just, and the world would just be accepting of how I existed, you know, and I could play and laugh and you know, until I got to the playgrounds of Canada, Edmonton, you know, that's where it got really horrible. Like you were just a dirty kid, you know, you were not accepted. I remember so in Fiji, like, yes. And my existence was, you know, I was just allowed to exist. And that's happened to me also. The feeling, like the smile on my face happened was when the first time I went to Toronto, and I was just like, no one asked me about my hair. You know, no one wanted to touch it, you know. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't have happened if I was there. It's just when you're around other Black folks, you know, a more diverse community where there's melanin and different shades of melanin, like like I was so happy in myself. So being in Edmonton, you know, as a kid, I was, and this is just a fact, like these are just facts. You know, you don't belong, and your existence is always questioned. And usually, as you get older, it is met with visceral, violent words and sometimes violence. And so I make sure to go back to Fiji every 2 years. I think I'm really into this position where every year I go back. And because I need to not feel different, you know? And, you know, my partner, you know, like I've mentioned, my great friend, Fiona McDougall, I was having such a hard time in my last year of work that our partners got together and said, okay, we've just got this trip planned. You both go to Toronto for a week. It's your Black excellence trip, and you do all the things you want to with all the folks you want to. And, when we did that, and we drank a lot of Henny, and we were like two grumpy, queer, like grandpas, and we go there, and we are just, and it's just the thing about being surrounded by folks that look like you, that feel like you, that and so that really actually gave me the courage to quit my job and just to be like, there is something more than folks trying to drag me down constantly. But I love Fiji. Like, I wish everyone could, like, if the tickets weren't so expensive to get there, like, I love being from Fiji, and I love my village, and I love being there. And also, I would never survive. Like, I'm so westernized. There's no way that I could live in the village 24/7, like, for months on end. I am just too much of, like, I don't have the toughness to live village life, but I love going back there. And also we took our mom back there when she had passed away. And so it means a lot more to go back and see, and hear the stories of, like, my elders are, getting, and I don't have immediate family here. I do it on my Belgium side, on the white side, but so it's nice to hear and to kind of touch the skin of folks that look like me.
And what was a village in Fiji like? Can you describe it?
It's beautiful. So the village where I'm from is called Luvu, Cuvu, and it's coastal. So, I walk, there's a mango tree and a lemon tree to my right and left, and there's the ocean in front of me. And actually, what we're naming our business is Navika, and Navika is our family house. Navika is the center of our village, and it's where my great-grandparents raised the kids. And so it's actually the gathering center for the entire village. And we hold all our ceremonies there. Our deaths are there, our weddings are there, and so all our celebrations are held there. My family is also known as the town criers. So we go to all the other villages to send the news. So you'll always hear one of my uncles in the middle of some village, yelling from the middle of the village the news of the day, which can be startling.
That's amazing.
Like Black folks love to they love to repeat themselves, and and they love to be loud. And so my family is just like that, and I think that's why we're the town criers. Is like, we are very loud folks. We're also big folks, and we also repeat ourselves so much. It could have been like a 5-minute, kind of blip. It turns into 3 pages of just the same things.
So Nata, how do you think being Black was celebrated when you were growing up? Or do you think that it was because you were surrounded by family and everyone who looked like you, it was just a part of life?
I had a lot of distant aunties come and visit us in Edmonton. And so that helped the celebration parts. But I think that's what happened, though, was just like the celebration wasn't really part of the Blackness. Celebration was always appeasing to whatever audience I had to appease to in order to not kind of make anyone uncomfortable. And I think that's what you get really good at, right? Like, I think, so I'm not sure if I'm really all too comfortable with celebration and celebrating. I think that's what's coming out now more so. I mean, I've always been good at having a good time. you know, but celebrating Blackness, I think, was always just found in, you know, my family and my community, within my family, like, you know, within the Fijian community. Fijians, but, you know, my community was also tied to God, right? Like, so Fijians would gather in the spaces of the Bible or wherever the Bible was being shared, which was not part of my views, but I love the singing. I think I love the singing that happens within community or congregations.
And how do you think celebrating being Black in Edmonton differed from being home in Fiji?
I think it's that existence piece, you know? I don't know if I could call a time of celebration in Edmonton. And in Fiji, it's always like you can celebrate because you're not an other, you know? And so everything was lighter. And you didn't feel the weight of racism constantly, which I think in, you know, in Edmonton and Alberta, I felt it was always so heavy, and it was always against me. You know what I mean? Like, it was, you couldn't walk across the street without the N-word being thrown at you, and I couldn't understand it. And behind it would be so violent, you know. And I could never understand like how I was ever supposed to feel okay being around predominantly white folks. And I had a white father who didn't really understand the brevity of what it meant to just keep walking outside and having these things hurled at you, thinking that, you know, to have it roll off your back was part of what you were supposed to do. So I don't know if celebration, I think that's why it's, you know, why it's so important now to celebrate the color. And not be forgiving. Like I don't want to justify it or have to justify it to folks, you know? And I think you have to think about like, gosh, well, what does that do to you to deny like those actions of folks constantly, you know? Like and I think that's why I have such, you know, when I think back about my childhood or my parents' inability to prepare me in maybe the way I needed to be prepared, or to build so that it would build up my confidence instead of making me smaller and making me more appeasing to white folks, or making me so overly kind, you know, to begin with, because to anticipate that someone is going to say the N-word to me, or someone is going to be, you know, violent. And to understand that, like, yeah, I think you're right, Mahkeebah, like your parents are doing the best that they could. And I think part of that, their best, made me quiet and subservient in a way that that's not what their intentions were. My two sisters are biracial. And, you know, when I was about 20 years old, my sister was 17, and, you know, we'd stayed up till like 4 a.m. just talking. And it was one of the first times where I realized the world that she had to live in, and how it's so not like, and how still it's very hard for her to navigate now that she has a child who, you know, when that child was 3 years old, like 4 years old, wanted to like wipe off the dirt off her skin, you know, and really like trying to understand what that world was like for my sister has been quite difficult for me to hear or to be in, and trying to hold space for her, because it's still not a place of like, you know, you trying to have to pick sides, or this ability to like, you know, have to pick sides, or who do you identify with more, or, you know, well, you have it easy, and I just felt, I mean, that really changed for me around really listening to her around what she was experiencing. because she's quite light-skinned, and so, folks would just use the most vile words to her, not thinking that she, and then her trying to make herself small because she would never dare say that her mom was black. And so that became, very different. Hello?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm here. That was just like, it's hearing that, it's hard to not get emotional because it's really heavy, and it's I feel like kinship in that story. So it's that long pause was just, it just makes me sad, especially hearing like this next generation of younger children are still going through the same things that we went through. And it's been so long of this, and it's so exhausting that it, like, there's moments where I have like great hope, and then there's other moments where I'm like, should we just go down with this ship, or like,
totally.
And it's towing that line of like, we have to have hope, we have to have drive, we have to fight for things, we have to continue to keep pushing forward. But at the same time, like, I remember being little and wanting to wipe the brown off my skin. Like that's one of my most visceral memories as a child. So, and like my dad would make, I mean, I don't want to say too much of my dad's things without him present. Obviously, like, I want to respect that, but I know he was really, really hurt that he felt that I always wanted to be white. Like, I always wanted to honor my white side more. And it wasn't because I didn't love who I was and his family and him and all those things. It was just because it was almost like being black was a stain on who I was as an individual. And I wanted, and seeing all the things that were stacked against me in order to like get ahead, I just didn't want that to impact me as negatively as people like in my like people historically have been treated. Sorry, I'm like fumbling because I'm like trying not to get emotional, but yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
And Nata, when you came to Canada, do you remember the very first time that a stranger commented on your race?
I'll tell you a memory that stands out for me, and I was in grade 3, and I was on the playground. It was recess time, and I had to climb the monkey bars because these kids were taunting me. And they were talking about my hair, and my mom had just picked out my afro. And because, and one of the things I think happened was that in Fijian culture, your hair is the most important thing. Like, as children, we're taught not to touch anyone's hair. It is actually we call it a lumu. So it is in royalty, in Fijian royalty, like the higher your hair, the more status you have and what have you. So everyone would comb out their afro. And my mom, bless her heart, would always do that because when she would pick her afro, she'd pick mine. And so we'd get ready for school, and, and she'd put me on the bus, except it was horrible going to a predominantly white school. So one of my first memories of being in Canada was going up and trying to get away from these kids who were taunting me. And I went up on the monkey bar, and it was the last recess, and the recess bell rang, and all the kids went in, and I fell down, and I hit my head, and I fell from the top to the bottom, and I laid there unconscious for quite a long time, so long that when I came to, it was after class. Like, I was there for about an hour and a half. None of the teachers came to see me, to see if I was okay, to do count or what have you. My dad came back after they'd called an ambulance and what have you. And I remember my dad being on the phone and being like calling them out about them being racist, and this would never happen to a white kid, and you let her. And I remember just my dad being so tuned in to the idea that my skin color had a part in me being left. And, and so that's probably one of my earliest memories of being here. But I think it was so constant. I was constantly, the N word was just thrown around so much as kids, and kids were just being kids. And yeah, and that kind of shaped me into having a hardness that that I wasn't really comfortable with. And that hardness also looked like kindness, like being overly kind to folks, to little white ladies that would pinch me, or folks wanting to take pictures with me. As a kid, like I remember being like as a prop. A lot of the times that I would be like propped up with my Wrangler jeans and my cowboy shirts and propped up on a stage, just to sit there.
Mm-hmm.
And,
wow.
To be kind of maybe a joke or someone you could be entertained by in some sort of way was true, I think, in my upbringing. And so I think that shaped a lot of how I, it's hard sometimes for me to figure out what people's intentions are. And that's somewhat made me kind of a recluse, I think, and in a bad way, and I really enjoy folks. And I really want to get to know them. I'm just not sure sometimes what their idea of me is.
Yeah.
And that can be tricky.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think this is how when I talk about this work, my work that I just stepped away from, trying to give myself and be vulnerable in an organization that I thought we were all on the same page about, the realization is like, oh, you think of my vulnerability as a tokenism or some sort of like resilience that you think you have a right to. Mm-hmm. And so I felt I think part of why I stepped away from the organization and refused to step away from the work.
Yeah.
And I think there is a clear distinction for me now that I refuse to give my time and my vulnerability to organizations that don't hold themselves accountable. And actually, I don't need them to. I don't have to keep putting myself in trauma for them to get it. I can do other things and align myself in other places that I think folks are doing the work that they need to do. And there's other Black organizations and Black and Indigenous led organizations, and where I think maybe that's where I want to be. I'm not interested in the white organizations any longer that aren't doing the work. And they don't need me to do the work. They can do their work by themselves. Like there's plenty of information out there. Go do that work,
Yeah, no excuses anymore.
Yeah. And now's not the time to be silent. Like, there's so much information out here. Like, let's get on with it.
Well, and ultimately, if an organization wants to sit in their racism, let us know so we can choose not to shop with you anymore or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, if you choose to not change, I'm saying it like half joking and half serious because I know that will never happen. But like, if you choose not to change, then beat it. Like, there's a lot of other things that I'd rather do with my time, energy, like heart, all those things. I'd rather just know. And so you can live in your truth as I'm living in mine. Like,
absolutely. Totally. Don't hide.
Yeah.
Let us see you.
Yeah. So Nata, I was wondering, and before I ask this question, I just want to recognize that we are operating and recording on land that is unceded land. And so when I use terms like Canada and Canadian, it's just like a broad brush to simplify. But do you see yourself as a Canadian? And if yes, how? And if not, what do you think quote unquote Canadian looks like?
Wow, that's a good question. You know what? I just got my Canadian citizenship in what are we 2019.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Thank you.
I think. It seems like a loaded thing to be like, I'm Canadian now, because I'm like, we're like, what?
You know, it was a really tough decision for me. It was a tough decision for me because first of all, the Fijian passport is turquoise blue, which is beautiful. It was a very tough decision. I had been a landed immigrant um, for 38. Well, yeah, no, I'm 45 now. So for however long, 42 years, 41 years. And so it was a really big decision. And I waited for Fiji to recognize dual citizenship before I embarked on the Canadian citizenship. And one of the reasons why I went through with Canadian citizenship was because of me and my partner travel quite a bit. And part of the security of being um, with a Canadian passport lent itself to a little bit more safety for me.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and I had really strong qualms as to what a Canadian was or is. I'm, an uninvited settler in this country. Yeah, and I think I'm not sure what a Canadian looks like. I know that we have a lot of work to empower Indigenous sovereignty, and that looks to me like as folks who hold Canadian citizenship, we should be striving for that. We should be doing as much as we can.
Yeah,
to,
I agree.
to work towards Indigenous sovereignty, and if that's and maybe that's what a Canadian looks like now. Is that maybe we can all start doing that.
Yeah.
But I know it's. I think there's lots of mixed feelings. I think if you don't have mixed feelings about being Canadian citizenship, then there's something wrong with you.
I mean, I'm not going to disagree. I think it's been some time for myself. I don't know about you, Sideah, but for some time where I felt really conflicted about being Canadian. Like, there's obviously some aspects of things that are like, very Canadian that I benefited from and have the privileges associated with, but there's also a lot of guilt associated with when you know more about Canada's history, how Canada has been complicit in their treatment of Indigenous folks, as well as many, many other groups of color over the years, and how there's this narrative that Canadians are so polite and at least we're not like the States and it's so safe here, but that's not the reality for every Canadian. So it's definitely a really challenging place to sit. But I agree with you, Nata. It's important that we have that kind of conflict internally going on, because that's the only way that we can strive to make this a better place for all people living on this land, not just the select few that benefit from all the privileges here.
And also and let's realize that and let's move on. Like, let's get on with the work that needs to be done. There's I think and as long as we're not taking away from like the serious work that needs to be done, if not now, then like more than ever, like we need to start doing something, doing anything.
Who are we to demand allyship from people if we can't give that same allyship to them? I think that's a big thing that's been a topic of conversation. I think within my friend group and beyond, it's like, we've been demanding and fighting for all these things for years. Like, we need to show that same agency towards other groups of people. It can't just be this like isolated thing where every group is like going against each other. Like, everyone needs to work together here.
Yeah, and with the realization too, when I'm anti-Blackness is a real thing. It is so embedded in so many cultures, and it becomes the beast sometimes that is not talked about, like that we do not get to name that as something that really stops us from being in collaboration when other organizations or groups deny that anti-Blackness is well within and so accepted in cultures, and yeah, I mean, I think about this when I am thinking about allyship and solidarity and wanting to put that on the table as well as something that is holding us back in talking about how we can be allies and how we can, work in this really complicated and dynamic structures that pit us against each other.
Yeah.
And love that.
And I have your final question, Nata. Mahkeebah, I thought we could just combine these last two because they're quite similar.
Yeah.
But after the resurgence of the Black Lives Movement, for me anyway, it felt like there was this almost societal shift in how people approach people of color. Have you felt like your friend base has shifted? Do you feel like there's a difference in how strangers approach you?
I mean, it's gotten a lot smaller.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah, baby.
Baby.
Well, I mean, and it goes to like, I, again, am having zero, I just don't have the ability to negotiate my existence. And I don't want to do that in friendship. And I don't want to do it under the guise of friendship. Like, just because I'm friends with you doesn't mean I'm going to debate with you, me. You can either accept it or you can go be with yourself, or
I love that, like, the door meme. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's like this person pointing at the door and like, I'm like, if you don't like it, the door.
I can walk out of it, but we're not going to stay in this room together,
Yeah.
I think a lot of things have come up. Well, and I think I felt so much more empowered to not debate my existence or I don't need to hear your opinion on racism if it's not aligned with who I am. Yeah. I actually am not interested in and I've had this, in my workplace, because I worked with the courts a lot. This one, I just remember this one guy saying to me, he's like, I know all about white privilege and I'm over it. And he's like, this is white guy telling me this. And I'm just like, oh, I don't think you know anything about anything. And he wanted to hold court with me. And I was just like, no, I got to go this way.
The door.
Yeah. So someone calling my name?
But I don't know. I think there's just lots of empowerment that came out of the BLM and having these conversations with folks that wanted to have the conversations. And not only that, but putting action items behind those conversations. For me, it's no longer about continuing to have that conversation. I think it's about making sure that we are doing tangible things and efforts in order to move those conversations and pieces in all levels of, my world, at least. I don't want to just be, have folks talk to me around it. I want us to come together around tangible ways in order to fulfill the mission.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know sometimes what that looks like, but and I think that's the great thing also about having conversations is you if you have a safe space to do it, you have the ability to figure it out with folks who are trying to figure it out as well. Because I've talked around my exhaustion, and I think I'm going to step away from that, using that, because there's a lot of energy too I can derive not being in that exhaustion, but the other parts, everything that surrounds that exhaustion is energy that I can tap into. And so find those ways in order to to figure that out, because I still want to have those conversations, and I want to find the lightness in it, but and also pay homage to the heaviness of it, and I want to, and I think that's kind of like, what we've done in this conversation is that there's been these light parts and these heavy parts and all the parts in between, and I think that, to me, I derive so much energy from that, because I will take this, my takeaway is that I will go into my days thinking about the conversations that have been had here and the conversations that I will continue to have outside of this podcast, and what that looks like. To me, feels really good at like being able to create what that's going to look like. And it sounds like, it's going to be with a former VPD officer at 5 p.m. So.
Well, we don't want to keep you for too long. This has been so wonderful having you on here again. And thank you I'm sure I can speak for Mahkeebah as well. Like, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It's always enlightening and wonderful to have you here. We're going to close this out with the rapid fire questions.
Last time, Nata, I asked you what your last meal would be. So in keeping with that theme, what is your favorite snack of the moment?
My favorite snack are these sesame seed crackers.
Like those ones from when you're a kid, like the sweet ones?
They're not sweet. I don't know. I've been spending a lot of time in Canadian Tire, and I know. But they make the lineup so, like, the hallway's so long to get to the cashier. And so there was these sesame seed crackers. No, I never had them as a kid, but I'm definitely gorging on them as an adult.
Perfect. I love hearing about new snacks. So yeah, that's why that had a follow-up question.
And what's your favorite travel destination?
Indonesia. I loved Bali, and it was such a cool place to go to. I would go there again, but it's a place where you have to go with friends. This is a place where you enjoy with a group of friends who love all the things Indonesia has to offer.
Excellent. So in keeping with that, your worst travel destination?
Oh, my partner's going to hate this. And it has nothing to do with, actually, we went to Playa del Carmen one time, and there was a DJ festival. And I couldn't even name a DJ. There was a DJ festival that I think started at 2 a.m. And
oh, wow.
It was amazing. I can't name one DJ, and they had like a whole weekend full of DJs, and I think we would have planned a little bit better than going to a DJ festival.
And what is your proudest memory?
Probably when my little sister was born, and we're 11 years apart. And when she was born, because we had planned her as a family, my parents had asked us, do you want another sibling? My other sister was like, absolutely not. Yes, like, we need to get her right on this, sister, because so when she was born with Down syndrome, and it was also the one time that I heard my mom yell at the doctors to get out because they wanted her to be put into an institution. And so that was one of my proudest moments. Well, I think it was my mom's, listening to my mom and then being so excited that my sister was born.
Oh, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm like, after that answer, I don't want to ask this question, but I'm going to. What is your favorite song of the moment? Like this deep question, and like, what are you listening to at the moment?
Oh God, you know what? I've been listening to a lot of Tupac.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just trying. I'm getting back to poetic justice. So I need to watch Poetic Justice again. But yes, I've been listening to a lot of Tupac.
I mean, he was a poet, so I think there's a couple songs that I'm like, this is not poetry, but I think there are some very meaningful things in his body of work. So I like that answer.
Well, thank you, Nata.
Yes, thank you for joining us again. It's always so insightful speaking with you, and I learn a lot. And yeah, you're just amazing.
Yeah, you both are lovely. I really appreciate you both and the work that you're doing. Yeah, grateful. Thank you.
Well, enjoy your dinner.
Yeah.
Your glass of wine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Nata. That's Trash would like to honor and recognize that this episode was recorded on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations.
We would also like to thank Jessica Gibson at the National Screen Institute of Canada and our mentor, Kim Ann Wilson, for their support with this project.